Have you ever wondered how people dared to fall asleep while traveling far from home in a time when there were no secure hotels, no locks you could trust, no phones to call for help? The simple act of resting on the road was once one of the most dangerous choices a person could make, and yet travelers managed it. They learned ways to guard themselves, to hide, to trust companions, and to carve moments of sleep from journeys that often lasted weeks. Hello everyone, and welcome. Tonight we'll step into the weary shoes of those travelers. If you enjoy these calm walks into forgotten corners of daily life, you may gently subscribe, so the next journey waits for you like a lantern at dusk. The road by day was challenging enough. Long miles, rough paths, aching feet, and the constant uncertainty of where food or water might be found. But the road by night brought an entirely different test, the need for rest. Imagine walking from one town to another, hours stretching endlessly, and then realizing the sun had set while no safe bed was in sight. Have you ever been caught far from home at night and felt unease settle in? For travelers of earlier centuries, that unease was constant. The first question was always where to sleep. By fields, in barns, beneath wagons. Travelers had to choose carefully. Open ground left them exposed to weather and wandering eyes. Forests offered cover, but also the threat of unseen creatures and shifting sounds. Roadsides tempted with convenience, but carried the danger of discovery. Each choice carried its own risks. There was no perfect answer, only the least dangerous option. Groups often fared better than lone wanderers. A circle of companions could take turns watching while others rested. Fires gave warmth, but also revealed position. Should they be lit, or should they remain hidden in darkness? The decision depended on the land, the season, and the stories told about that stretch of road. Have you ever chosen between comfort and caution, knowing one might cancel out the other? Travelers balanced those questions nightly. Even wagons became improvised shelters. Cloth was stretched over frames, straw laid inside, and people curled close together. It was not luxury, but it shielded them from rain and soft the earth. Yet wagons were noisy and heavy, easy to find. A sleeping traveler inside relied on others to guard the wheels. Trust became as important as blankets. Without it, rest was shallow at best. The cleverest travelers made use of sounds. Some tied bells to their belongings, not bells for worship, but small clappers fixed to packs and wagons, so if anyone tampered with them, the noise would rouse the sleeper. Others scattered dry twigs around their camp, creating a natural alarm system. The crack of a step on wood gave warning. Have you ever set something against a door to make sure you'd hear if it opened? The same instinct guided travelers centuries ago. Animals, too, were guards of a sort. Dogs barked when strangers approached, though feeding them on the road was not easy. Horses neighed, shifted, and sometimes refused to calm if someone unfamiliar drew near. Even a mule could bray loudly enough to wake sleeping companions. These accidental alarms were valued, though they came with their own troubles, sometimes spooking at harmless noises, keeping tired people awake when rest was needed most. Still, despite all tricks, sleeping on the road was never fully safe. The night brought vulnerability. Eyes closed, ears dulled, weapons or tools out of reach. To sleep was to trust the world, not to strike. or to trust one's preparations. To give warning, travelers often woke many times through the night, sitting up at the slightest noise, checking lanterns, making sure companions were still near. Sleep was shallow, broken, but necessary. And yet, people survived these nights again and again. They learned rhythms of caution. They sought cover behind hedges, under bridges, inside wagons. They built habits, tying belongings close, placing shoes within reach, keeping water nearby. Their routines did not remove the danger, but they reduced it enough to make sleep possible. So how did travelers manage to sleep safely on the road? By never trusting entirely, but by trusting enough. By preparing carefully, sharing responsibility, and accepting that sleep would be fragile, but still possible. They did not expect comfort. They expected survival, and in that they found the strength to close their eyes, if only for a while, as the road stretched endlessly around them. Have you ever noticed how much comfort a roof brings, even if it is only a simple one? Travelers centuries ago knew this truth well. On the road, safety often depended on finding some kind of shelter, not luxury, not even comfort, but anything that kept rain off, softened the wind, and made a person less visible to wandering eyes. The search for such shelter became a nightly ritual, as important as food or water. When night approached, the first question was always, where can we rest? The landscape offered many answers, none perfect. Barns were popular choices, though. Permission was needed. Farmers sometimes allowed weary travelers to sleep in corners of their stables, where straw provided warmth. The price might be a coin or help with morning chores. Have you ever bargained for a place to stay, trading effort for rest? For travelers, this was common practice. Fields were another option. Tall grass or haystacks gave concealment, though. They offered little protection from dew or rain. Many wrapped themselves in cloaks, lying low, trusting the cover to keep them unseen. The risk here was discovery, waking to the farmer's anger, or worse, the attention of those looking for. Easy prey, yet for those with no other choice, fields became beds more often than anyone admitted. Woods and forests seemed tempting, with branches overhead and leaves for bedding, but they carried their own dangers. Animals moved freely, and the rustle of undergrowth often kept travelers restless. Darkness under trees was deeper than anywhere else, making it easy to imagine threats just beyond sight. Have you ever camped in a forest and felt surrounded by noises? Multiply that unease, and you know what travelers endured when forced to sleep under branches. Bridges offered another form of shelter. The space beneath them kept rain away and provided a hiding place, though dampness and the sound of running water made rest uneasy. Still, travelers often chose them, grateful for stone above their heads. Some learned to sleep lightly, the steady rush of water masking smaller sounds. Others found the noise unsettling, a constant reminder that the world never fully slept. Abandoned structures became havens. A roofless shed, a crumbling house, even walls half standing, gave enough cover to make travelers feel safer than the open road. But ruins carried their own unease. They creaked in wind, their shadows seemed unnatural, and the mind quickly filled them with stories. Still, when faced with rain or snow, travelers took them gratefully, convincing themselves that stone walls, however broken, were better than none at all. Not all shelter was built or found. Sometimes travelers created their own. Cloaks stretched over branches became tents. Wagons turned into sleeping places. Even large sacks filled with straw gave some barrier between body and earth. These makeshift shelters were fragile, but they gave the mind what it needed most, the sense of being enclosed, however thin the barrier. Have you ever pulled a blanket over your head just to feel safe? Travelers did the same with whatever materials they carried. The search for shelter was not only about weather, it was about visibility. To sleep openly on the road meant being seen. A person lying exposed became a target for thieves, or simply a curiosity for strangers. Cover meant privacy, and privacy meant a chance at rest. That was why even the smallest roof, the lowest hedge, or the darkest corner could feel like luxury to a weary traveler. Yet shelter was never guaranteed. Many nights ended with travelers forced to accept poor conditions, huddled under trees, curled beside wagons exposed to drizzle or wind. They endured because they had to, and because tomorrow's road demanded energy. Sleep, no matter how fragile, was necessary. So how did travelers search for shelter? By weighing risk against need, by taking what was available, and by accepting imperfection. Safety was never complete, but even the humblest cover gave enough comfort to close one's eyes for a while. And in that fragile rest, strength returned for the miles ahead. Have you ever tried sleeping in a place where you didn't quite feel safe? Maybe a train station, an airport, or even a friend's house where the noises were unfamiliar. You probably noticed that sleep came only in shallow bursts because your mind refused to let its guard down. For travelers centuries ago, this was the ordinary experience. Unless they were alone, the one thing that helped most was trust. Trust in the companions they traveled with. Companions were not always chosen. Some were family members, some were merchants joining for convenience, others were strangers who happened to walk the same road. But whether by blood or by chance, travelers quickly understood that safety at night depended on sharing responsibility. Have you ever noticed how much more comfortable you feel when someone else is awake while you rest? That comfort was vital. Groups organized themselves with care. They decided who would watch first, who would rest, and when the shifts would change. A fire might be tended by one person while others lay under cloaks, heads on packs. The sound of a companion shifting, coughing, or whispering was oddly reassuring, proof that someone was awake and listening. Sleep came easier when another pair of eyes scanned the darkness. Trust extended beyond keeping watch. Belongings were often piled together, close to where companions lay, so that no single person had to guard their things alone. Travelers often rested in tight circles, backs inward, feet outward, a formation that gave comfort as well as defense. It was not perfect, nothing on the road ever was, but it was enough to allow eyes to close for more than a few minutes at a time. Stories passed between companions during the day became anchors at night. Tales told by the fire distracted from fear, laughter eased tension, and shared memories built bonds. Have you ever noticed how a story told before sleep can soften the edges of fear? Travelers used this instinct, weaving conversation into courage. By the time silence settled, they trusted each other more deeply than before. Of course, trust was not given lightly. Strangers were watched carefully, and suspicion sometimes kept entire groups awake. A wrong glance, a careless hand near another's pack, a refusal to take a turn on watch. These small signals could unravel trust quickly. When that happened, the night stretched long, full of unease. Sleep would not come, because fear came from both outside and inside the circle. But when trust held, rest was possible, even in rough conditions. A traveler might fall asleep to the sound of a companion's quiet humming, or the steady rhythm of someone tending the fire. They woke hours later, stiff but alive, grateful that another had kept the night at bay. In this way, bonds between travelers deepened quickly. Shared vulnerability built friendship faster than days of polite acquaintance. Animals were sometimes part of these trusted circles. A dog curled at the edge of camp, a horse shifting near the group. Even these presences gave comfort. They were living companions, adding weight to the circle, sharing its watchfulness in their own way. Their ears and instincts extended the senses of the group, sometimes noticing what humans missed. So how did trust help travelers sleep safely? On the road, by spreading the weight of fear. Alone, a traveler bore every risk. Together they divided it, each person giving the other space to rest. Safety was never certain, but it became stronger when shared. And in that shared safety, sleep, fragile, broken, but real, became possible. Have you ever sat by a campfire and noticed how the flames make you feel safer, even if you know the fire itself cannot stop much? That instinct to draw comfort from fire was shared by every traveler on the road. In a world where darkness pressed close and shadows whispered, a fire was more than warmth. It was a guard, a signal, a companion. And for those trying to sleep far from home, it was often the difference between rest and wakefulness. A fire gave light, and light meant sight. Even if it reached only a few steps, it revealed enough to settle nerves. Shapes became clear. A tree was a tree, a barrel was a barrel, a companion was only rolling in their cloak. Have you ever seen how a lantern transforms the mood of a room? A fire did that for an entire circle of weary travelers. But fire was also a risk. Its glow could be seen from far away. Thieves, curious strangers, or even hungry animals could be drawn to it. Travelers argued often about whether to light one. Some insisted it was too dangerous. Others said the risk of being found was outweighed by the comfort it gave. The decision was rarely simple, and every choice carried consequences. When fire was chosen, it was tended carefully. Branches and sticks were gathered, arranged so the flames would last but not roar too brightly. Travelers learned to keep the fire low, letting it glow instead of blaze. This balance gave warmth and light without throwing shadows too far. It was a delicate craft, practiced night after night by those who knew the value of rest. Fires also gave protection against cold. Sleeping without cover in chill nights was nearly impossible. The fire softened the air, kept dew from settling, and allowed travelers to close their eyes without shivering, awake minutes later. Even a small flame, carefully shielded, gave enough warmth to make the difference between misery and uneasy comfort. Then there was the psychological guard. Fire crackled, hissed, and popped. Its sounds filled silence that otherwise felt unbearable. Have you ever noticed how noise makes emptiness less sharp? The fire's voice gave the impression of life, of company. It reminded travelers that they were not entirely alone, even when the night pressed hardest. Fires became watch posts. The person on guard sat nearest, adding wood, stirring embers, keeping the glow alive. Others slept in the circle of its warmth. If anything approached, the guard saw it first, silhouetted against the faint light. Fire gave the eyes an advantage, however small, and in the dark world of the road, every advantage mattered. Ashes themselves carried meaning. In the morning, travelers covered or scattered them, leaving little sign of their rest. This practice was not only practical but protective, hiding evidence of where they had stopped. The road was always full of unseen eyes, and erasing the night's fire meant erasing a trace of vulnerability. Yet even with a fire, sleep was not deep. Travelers woke at cracks in the woods, at sparks that leapt too high, at sudden gusts of smoke. They knew the fire was not perfect protection. It was only a fragile circle, a bubble of warmth in an endless ocean of dark. Still, it gave them something to trust, something to hold on to, as their bodies demanded rest. So why were fires so important for travelers? Because they gave more than heat and light. They gave the illusion of safety strong enough to allow the body to surrender, if only for a little while. And sometimes illusion was all a traveler needed to close their eyes and drift into sleep on a road that was never truly safe. Have you ever tried to sleep while knowing that someone else was keeping watch for you? That subtle comfort, the sound of another shifting nearby, the flicker of their lantern, was the foundation of safe travel centuries ago. On the road, sleep was rarely deep, but it was made possible by a system of guarded rest, where trust and duty wove together into fragile security. Travelers quickly learned that eyes could not stay open forever. Even the most cautious person eventually needed to surrender to exhaustion. So groups divided the night into shifts. One or two stayed awake, watching the fire, scanning the road, listening for movement. The others curled in cloaks, heads on packs, allowing their bodies to rest for a few hours. Then, when the watchers grew tired, they were woken, and another took their place. This rhythm was rarely perfect. Those on watch often fought drowsiness, jerking awake when their heads drooped. Some whispered to themselves, others paced quietly, their footsteps keeping sleep at bay. The weight of responsibility pressed heavily. Not only their own safety, but the safety of everyone else depended on their wakefulness. Have you ever struggled to stay awake, knowing others relied on you? That was the nightly burden of the watch. The sleepers, meanwhile, never fell entirely into slumber. Their ears stayed half alert, ready to respond if a companion's voice called out. The crack of a branch, the sudden alarm of a dog, the shift of hooves, these noises woke them quickly. Sleep came in short waves, enough to restore strength, but never deep enough to erase awareness. Rest was survival, not luxury. Signals were agreed upon. A sharp cough, a whistle, a phrase spoken aloud, these told the group to rise if danger appeared. Some even had physical alarms, a rope tied around the camp that tugged when pulled, or small stones placed around the fire that rattled when stepped on. These simple measures allowed sleep to come with a little more ease. Trust bound the system together. Without it, guarded rest collapsed. Companions had to believe that those awake would truly remain vigilant. Suspicion poisoned the camp, keeping everyone restless. But when trust was strong, even shallow sleep refreshed. People awoke knowing someone had shouldered the weight for them, even for just a few hours. Of course, lone travelers had no such system. They dozed lightly, waking at the faintest sound, their rest broken and unsatisfying. Many avoided sleeping altogether until exhaustion forced them. That was why groups were prized, not only for protection while awake, but for the possibility of rest when asleep. Alone, the road was unbearable. Together, it was survivable. Even now, as you listen, you can imagine that circle of travelers, one awake, the others lying close, fire glowing faintly, belongings piled nearby. And if you'd like more of these quiet journeys through forgotten daily struggles, you may gently subscribe so the next story keeps watch with you, the way a trusted companion once did for weary travelers. So how did guarded rest keep people safe? By sharing the burden of vigilance. Sleep could never be deep, but it could be enough. Eyes that closed did so knowing others were open, and in that shared duty, fragile safety was carved from the long and restless night. Have you ever lain down somewhere unfamiliar and felt the ground itself keep you awake? Travelers on long journeys often had no choice but to rest directly beside the road, turning bare earth into a bed and the open sky into a roof. It was not comfort they sought, but necessity. The day's miles demanded recovery, and so they adapted to the simplest of resting places. The roadside offered both convenience and danger. It was easy to stop when exhaustion struck, easy to light a small fire, easy to rise again when morning came. But it also meant exposure to the weather, to passers-by, to anyone who might walk the same road under cover of night. Have you ever tried to nap in a public place, glancing up every few minutes to check your surroundings? That uneasy sleep mirrored what travelers felt each night they chose the roadside. They prepared carefully. Packs were pulled close, shoes tucked under cloaks, valuables hidden beneath bodies. The ground was softened with straw when possible, or with spare cloth. Some spread cloaks wide, sharing warmth by lying shoulder to shoulder. In summer they faced the discomfort of insects and dew. In winter, frost stiffened limbs and made waking painful. Yet for all the hardship, the road's edge was often the only option. Markers guided where they stopped. A hedge gave cover, a ditch broke the wind, a rise in the ground offered a view of approaching footsteps. Travelers learned to see the landscape, not as scenery, but as shelter. Have you ever chosen the seat in a cafe that let you watch the door? The same instinct guided them, to rest where they could see and where they might be seen less. Noise was constant. Wagons creaked by in late hours, drivers calling to tired horses. Stray animals padded along, sniffing at sleeping figures. Travelers sometimes woke to find a stranger stepping past in the dimness. No words exchanged, just a glance that said, "You are here. I see you, and I will move on." Those encounters were brief but unforgettable, reminders of how fragile sleep could be on the open road. Children, when present, often slept more soundly than adults, exhaustion overwhelming fear. Their easy rest gave comfort to weary parents, though worry never fully vanished. Adults closed their eyes lightly, ears straining for sounds the fire did not mask. They woke often, sometimes every hour, shifting positions, checking companions. Sleep came in pieces, but pieces were enough to keep moving the next day. The road itself sometimes gave rhythm to rest. A well-traveled path carried noise long into the night, reminding sleepers they were not alone. Quieter roads gave only wind and insects, their silence heavy. Some found comfort in the sound of footsteps passing. Others found it unsettling, fearing what those steps might mean. Despite the discomfort, memories of these nights stayed vivid. Travelers later recalled lying under stars brighter than they had ever seen at home, fires crackling low, voices fading into whispers before silence took over. Fear was real, but so was a kind of wonder, the sense of being part of the road itself, sharing its loneliness, its openness, its endless stretch. So how did travelers sleep beside the road? By adapting to its harshness. They accepted broken rest, shallow dreams, and constant interruptions. They found cover where they could, trusted companions when they had them, and relied on small habits to ease their minds. Safety was never complete, but sleep was possible, even if it was fragile, restless and brief. Have you ever tried to fall asleep in an unfamiliar place and found yourself listening more than resting? On the road, sound became both friend and enemy. For travelers, every creak, rustle, and sigh of the night shaped how well they could close their eyes. In the absence of strong walls and safe locks, it was their ears that guarded them, staying awake long after their eyes grew heavy. The road was never silent. Even far from towns, noises lingered. Wind pressed against hedges, shifting branches until they scratched against one another. Grass whispered under the feet of unseen creatures. Insects sang, sometimes steady, sometimes sudden, their calls rising out of nowhere. Have you ever lain awake at night and realized the world was far from quiet? That was the constant lesson of the road. Sound was everywhere. Some sounds reassured. The crackle of a fire reminded travelers that warmth remained. The slow, steady breathing of companions proved that they were not alone. A horse shifting, its hooves tapping gently, was the sound of strength nearby. Dogs, when present, gave comfort in their growls or whimpers, living alarms that promised, warning if anything approached. These noises allowed the mind to settle, weaving a fragile sense of security from familiar rhythms. Other sounds unsettled. A sudden snap of a twig made sleepers sit upright, hearts pounding. A rush of wings across the dark sky felt like something swooping closer. A distant shout. Was it anger, laughter, or something else? Travelers could not always tell. The night magnified every noise, stripping it of context and turning it into a puzzle. And puzzles in darkness rarely had comforting answers. The most difficult sounds were footsteps. Sometimes they were real. Another traveler passing late, a farmer walking home, a cart creaking by. Sometimes they were imagined, the mind reshaping. Echoes into pursuit. Have you ever heard a sound at night that seemed too regular to ignore? That was the fear that someone was drawing near, not friend, but foe, and that sleepers would wake too late. Travelers adapted by assigning listeners. Even while others rested, one stayed half awake, ears tuned for change. These guards learned to separate normal from unusual, the harmless from the threatening. A dog's bark at a fox required no alarm, but a sudden silence in the woods demanded attention. Sleepers trusted these listeners, knowing their ears would catch what their dreams ignored. Rain added its own layer of sound. It drummed softly on cloaks, hissed in fires, splashed into puddles. Some found comfort in its steady rhythm, sleeping more deeply beneath its cover. Others worried it masked dangerous noises, hiding footsteps or voices until they were too close. Rain gave and took, soothing some, unsettling others. In open fields, sounds carried far. A shout could travel for miles. An animal's cry seemed near when it was distant. In forests, the opposite was true. Noises hid themselves, muffled by leaves, swallowed by trunks. Each setting changed the way sound guided sleep, forcing travelers to learn its patterns as carefully as they learned the shape of the land. And sometimes silence itself was the loudest sound. When all noise stopped, no wind, no animals, no fire crackling, travelers grew uneasy. Have you ever noticed how silence can feel heavier than noise? To them it was a warning, as though the night itself held its breath, waiting. In those moments, sleep was impossible. Eyes opened, ears strained, waiting for the silence to break. So how did travelers manage to sleep with all these sounds? By learning to sort them, to decide quickly which to trust and which to fear. They trained themselves to rest lightly, ears open even in dreams. Sound was not only the enemy of sleep, but its guardian too. It could jolt them awake in fear, but it could also soothe them with reminders that life still moved nearby. On the road, sleep was never complete. It was stitched together by sound, broken, shallow, but enough to keep the journey going. And in the morning, when voices rose and wagons creaked to life, travelers carried those restless nights forward, grateful simply that sound had warned, guided, and allowed them to rest at all. Have you ever noticed how small routines make strange places feel less threatening? A blanket folded a certain way, shoes placed where you can reach them, a habit of checking doors before bed. For travelers centuries ago, these little patterns were more than habits, they were strategies. On the road, routines turned fear into something manageable, giving the mind enough order to allow sleep to come, however briefly. As evening approached, routines began. Fires were gathered or avoided. Belongings were stacked, cloaks spread on the ground. Travelers checked their packs, tying straps tightly, hiding coins deep within layers. Shoes were set near heads, ready to slip on quickly if alarm rose. Some placed walking sticks or knives within reach, not as weapons of war, but as tools of defense if startled awake. Have you ever slept with something close by just in case? That instinct guided travelers nightly. Food, if any remained, was eaten before sleep. Sharing a simple meal, bread, dried fruit, cheese, gave a sense of closure to the day. The act of eating together reminded companions that they were a group, united against whatever the night might bring. Even lone travelers often ate slowly, grounding themselves in a rhythm before lying down. Hunger unsettled sleep. Routine calmed it. Then came the arrangement of rest. Companions chose positions carefully. Stronger members at the edges, lighter sleepers near the center, children shielded by adults. Fires, when lit, sat in the middle, with sleepers arranged in circles or clusters. The formation mattered. Have you ever noticed how sitting with your back to a wall feels safer? That same instinct shaped how travelers lay down, each position, chosen for both comfort and protection. Some routines were superstitions in disguise, though not tied to belief, more practical traditions. A traveler might always scatter twigs near their head. Another always tuck their pack beneath their knees. These actions calmed the mind, convincing it that order had been restored, that the dangers of the road were not ignored but answered in. Some way, whether effective or not, they gave the sleeper peace enough to drift into light rest. Watches were set with quiet ceremony, a hand on the shoulder, a whispered word, a nod in return. Those who lay down knew who remained awake, and those who watched knew when their turn would end. The exchange was routine, repeated endlessly, yet it carried deep weight. It meant safety was shared, and that trust had been renewed for another night. Even the act of lying down followed patterns. Cloaks pulled high, belts loosened but not removed, heads turned toward companions or fire. Few allowed themselves to sprawl or roll. Their bodies stayed half-ready, prepared to rise quickly. Sleep was fragile, but routine gave it shape. In these small actions, fear softened. The mind, satisfied that steps had been taken, released some of its tension. Sleep came not because the world was safe, but because the traveler convinced themselves they had done all they could. Have you ever fallen asleep after double-checking something, finally able to let go? That moment of surrender was precious to those on the road. Morning broke the routine in reverse. Belts tightened, shoes laced, cloaks shaken free of dew. Fires were stamped out, ashes scattered, belongings checked again. The act of rising felt like victory, proof that the night had passed without disaster. These routines repeated day after day, forming the quiet rhythm of survival. So what was the fragile comfort of routine? It was the power of small acts to tame great fear. Travelers could not control the dangers of the night, but they could control their preparation. And in that control, however slight, they found the strength to close their eyes and let sleep come. Have you ever tried to sleep in a strange place and found that your dreams seemed sharper, stranger, almost louder than usual? For travelers, dreams on the road often felt like that, restless and vivid, shaped by exhaustion and the unease of sleeping in unfamiliar ground. Night after night, these wandering dreams reminded them of both the comfort they longed for and the dangers they carried with them. Dreams began shallowly. Bodies worn from miles sank quickly, but minds hovered close to waking. Every snap of a twig, every rustle of wind dragged dreamers upward again. Their dreams were short, fragmented, flashes of home, sudden images of the road, echoes of conversations spoken hours before. Have you ever half dreamed while napping, only to wake, unsure whether the sound you heard was in your dream or the world around you? That was the nightly balance for travelers. The road shaped their dreaming. A merchant might dream of coins clinking, even as they clutched a pack under their cloak. A farmer carrying goods might see endless fields stretching in their sleep. Children dreamed of games, yet stirred awake at their parents' movements. The road itself never let go. Even in slumber, its weight pressed into thoughts as well as feet. Some dreams became warnings, a sudden image of pursuit, a shadow chasing, a lantern extinguishing. These jolted travelers awake, heart racing, eyes darting. They glanced at companions, at fire, at the horizon of shadows, before lying back down. Were these dreams mere imagination, or instincts sharpened by fear? No one could be certain, but many took them seriously, listening to what their sleeping minds whispered. And yet, not all dreams were fearful. Some gave comfort. Home returned in them. Warm beds, familiar voices, the smell of cooking, the sound of laughter. Have you ever dreamed of home while far away and felt your heart ache with both joy and sadness? Those dreams made travelers smile faintly, even as they shifted restlessly on hard ground. For a few moments the road disappeared, and comfort returned, if only inside the mind. Travelers spoke of these dreams in the morning. Companions compared their night visions, sometimes laughing, sometimes falling silent at the strangeness. Shared dreams became stories, passed along like gossip, adding to the group's sense of closeness. A man dreaming of being chased might find that his companion dreamed of running as well. Coincidence or proof that fear seeped into them all? No one knew, but the stories bound them tighter. Of course, sleep was too shallow for long dreams. Most ended quickly, broken by sounds or shifts. The watchman's cough, the crack of firewood, the shift of a horse, all shattered fragile dreamscapes. The night was less a stretch of continuous rest and more a series of short fragments, pieced together into enough energy to walk again at dawn. Even now, as you listen to this history, you can imagine those restless dreamers, lying on hard ground, heads pillowed on packs, shifting uneasily beneath cloaks. And if you wish for more of these calm journeys into forgotten corners of life, you may gently subscribe, so each new story finds you the way morning found those travelers, waking them from dreams into another day of walking. So what did dreams on the road mean? They were proof of the mind's resilience. Even in fear, even in exhaustion, imagination found a way to bring comfort, or to warn, or simply to remind the sleeper of what mattered most. Dreams gave them something the road could not take, a private world, fleeting but powerful, where safety and danger blended, but where rest, however fragile, was still possible. Have you ever stayed awake through the night, only to feel that surge of relief when the first pale light of dawn crept across the sky? For travelers, this moment was more than simple comfort. It was deliverance. The dangers of the road, both real and imagined, lost their power with daylight. Sleep may have been broken and shallow, but morning restored strength in ways no blanket or fire could. The darkest hours always came before the sunrise. Lanterns burned low, fires smoldered. Into ash, guards fought against closing eyes. Travelers turned in their cloaks, restless, waiting for the first hint of color on the horizon. Then, slowly, the world changed. Blackness softened into gray. Shapes long twisted by shadow revealed their true forms. The branch that seemed like a crouching figure was only wood. The movement at the edge of camp was only grass stirred by wind. That shift transformed everything. Fear receded with the night, and relief washed over the weary. Have you ever felt your body unclench without realizing it had been tense? The dawn brought that feeling to travelers each day, loosening knots of worry that had tightened hour by hour. The camp stirred early. Those on watch sighed with relief, knowing their duty was nearly over. Others, waking naturally with light, blinked against the morning air. Smoke lifted gently from dying fires, carrying the scent of ash across fields or roadsides. Animals shifted, horses stamping, dogs shaking their fur, birds beginning to call. The world grew alive again, and the night's silence melted into the sound of day. Morning also revealed whether preparations had been wise. Damp cloaks were shaken free of dew, boots pulled back on, packs tightened. Fires were fully stamped. Out, ashes scattered, evidence of rest erased from the roadside. The road demanded not only endurance but discretion. Travelers left little sign of their sleep, knowing others would follow the same paths in hours to come. Fatigue lingered, of course. Sleep on the road was never deep, never full. Eyes still ached, bodies still sagged, but morning carried a power greater than rest. It carried renewal. The day called them forward, reminding them that the night was survived, and that survival was itself victory. Conversations often began at dawn, soft and slow. Companions shared dreams, laughed at fears, traded quiet remarks about how often they had woken. These talks were not grand, but they wove the group together. Shared hardship built bonds. Each night endured became another thread in their connection. Have you ever noticed how small experiences repeated turned strangers into friends? That was the hidden gift of nights on the road. The memory of fear never vanished entirely. Each night carried its own lessons, each sound or shadow lingering in the mind, but daylight dulled them. The walker who swore they had heard footsteps in the dark laughed at the thought by noon. The companion who dreamed of pursuit dismissed it once the sun was high. Fear lost its edge and light, though it always returned the next evening. So what did dawn mean for travelers? It meant release. It meant proof that the night could be endured, that even broken sleep gave enough strength for another day. It meant that safety, however temporary, was restored with the sun, and in that knowledge travelers found courage to face another night when it inevitably came. This history ends where their nights always ended, with morning. The road stretched forward, long and uncertain, but fear was gone for now. They walked again, carrying not only packs and goods, but the memory of fragile rest and the promise that dawn would always return.